When a famous British actor walked into a television studio one Tuesday morning, he had no idea what was about to happen. Hugh Grant thought he was there for a simple interview about his new romantic comedy film. These morning chat shows were usually easy and fun. Actors would come on, tell some funny stories about making the movie, and encourage viewers to go see it in theaters. That was the routine, and Hugh had done it hundreds of times before in his long career. A production assistant knocked on his dressing room door after the makeup artist finished getting him ready for the cameras. They told him it was time to go on set. Hugh straightened his tie and took a deep breath. He felt confident because he knew exactly how these interviews worked. Walk out, smile, and wave at the audience. Sit down in the guest chair, answer some questions about the film, maybe share an amusing story from filming, and then remind everyone to go see the movie. It was simple and straightforward. The studio audience clapped loudly as Hugh walked onto the brightly lit set. 4 women sat behind a curved desk that was the signature look of the show. Each host had their morning coffee and papers in front of them. Denise Welch sat in the middle seat, showing that she was the most experienced host. The other hosts clearly looked to her as the leader. One of the hosts announced Hugh's arrival, calling him gorgeous as the crowd cheered. Hugh waved to everyone and walked to the guest chair across from the panel. He sat down, adjusted his jacket, and gave his familiar charming smile that fans loved. Denise welcomed Hugh to the show with the warm voice that television hosts practice for years. But then she said something that made Hugh uncomfortable. Before they talked about his new film, she said she had to ask about something in the tabloid newspapers. Hugh's smile became tighter. This was not how these interviews usually started. Normally there would be some friendly small talk first, maybe a joke about the weather or how early morning television starts. Hugh tried to redirect the conversation back to the film, saying it was funny and that viewers would enjoy hearing about working with the talented cast. But Denise would not change the subject. She leaned forward with a look that reminded Hugh of aggressive tabloid reporters. She said that surely Hugh understood their viewers were curious about his personal life. After all, he had been quite a romantic figure over the years. The other hosts looked at each other with concern. This was not what they had planned to discuss in their meeting before the show. They were supposed to focus on Hugh's return to romantic comedy films after spending time doing more serious dramatic roles. Hugh responded carefully, saying he always tried to keep his private life private. He thought that was healthier for everyone. His personal relationships were not relevant to whether people would enjoy watching him in a romantic comedy. The audience laughed at Hugh's self-deprecating humor, but Denise kept pushing. She said that Hugh was a public figure, and people were interested in the real person, not just the characters he played. There had been some interesting developments in his love life lately, had there not? Hugh shifted uncomfortably in his chair. The studio lights suddenly felt much hotter. He could see the camera operators zooming in to get closer shots of his face. This was starting to feel less like a friendly interview and more like an interrogation. Hugh said he was not sure what Denise was referring to, though his tone suggested he knew exactly what was coming next. Denise smiled, but now there was no warmth in it. She mentioned there had been reports about his relationship status and some explosive claims about his behavior in past relationships. She asked if Hugh thought his fans deserved to know what kind of man they were supporting when they bought tickets to his films. The question hung in the air like poison. Hugh's jaw tightened and his charming act disappeared completely. This was not journalism. This was attacking his character while disguising it as celebrity gossip. Hugh spoke slowly, with a steel edge in his voice that his romantic comedy fans rarely heard. He said his fans supported his work, not his personal life, and that was exactly how it should be. But Denise had sensed weakness and was not going to stop now. She suggested that Hugh's position was rather convenient. He could play the charming romantic lead on screen, but when it came to real-life relationships, the stories painted quite a different picture. The other hosts were now visibly uncomfortable. One of them tried to interrupt and suggest they talk about the film now. Denise cut her off sharply without taking her eyes off Hugh. She said this topic was important. She brought up that Hugh had been married for several years now, but before that there were some public incidents and embarrassing situations that might make people question whether he was really the romantic hero he portrayed on screen. The studio fell into an uncomfortable silence. Hugh gripped the armrests of his chair so tightly that his knuckles turned white. The audience, who had been laughing at his jokes moments before, now sat in stunned quiet. They could sense that something had shifted from playful conversation to something much darker and more sinister. Hugh asked if Denise was seriously bringing up tabloid gossip from decades ago on morning television. Was this what passed for journalism on this show? Denise's smile widened, as if she was feeding off his discomfort. She told Hugh not to get defensive. She was simply asking questions that viewers wanted answered. After all, Hugh was asking them to spend their money on his film. Did they not have a right to know who they were supporting? Hugh shot back that they had a right to know if the film was worth watching. They did not have a right to dissect his personal relationships from 20 years ago. That was not journalism. That was voyeurism. The camera operators kept filming, capturing every expression on Hugh's increasingly frustrated face. The director watching from the control room was probably excited about the drama unfolding live on air. This was the kind of television moment that would be replayed endlessly on social media and entertainment news programs. Denise laughed at the word voyeurism, a sharp and brittle sound. She said Hugh was a public figure who had made millions of pounds trading on his romantic image. Surely he could not pick and choose which parts of that image he wanted people to see. He wanted to be the charming, bumbling Englishman on screen, but heaven forbid anyone asked about the real man behind the character. One of the other hosts, clearly mortified, tried to do damage control by suggesting they move on to discussing the new film. Denise snapped at her that she was not finished, not even looking at her colleague. Her focus remained fixed on Hugh. She said she wanted to talk about accountability, about how celebrities think they can compartmentalize their lives. They want the fame, fortune, and adoration, but none of the scrutiny that comes with it. Hugh stood up abruptly. His chair scraped against the studio floor with a harsh sound that echoed through the suddenly silent space. He said this was absolutely ridiculous. He came to talk about a film, not to be ambushed with tabloid psychology from someone who clearly had her own agenda. Denise commanded him to sit down, her voice taking on an authoritative tone. She said they were not finished and there were important conversations to be had about celebrity responsibility. Hugh's voice rose, his famous stammer completely gone and replaced by crystal-clear anger. He asked about journalist responsibility. What about the responsibility to treat guests with basic human decency instead of turning a promotional interview into character assassination? The audience was completely silent now, watching this disaster unfold in real time. Some looked uncomfortable while others seemed riveted by the drama. The other hosts sat frozen, unsure whether to intervene or let the situation play out. Denise fired back, telling Hugh not to lecture her about journalism. She had been doing this longer than he had been making films. Part of her job was asking questions that mattered, not just serving up easy promotional content for celebrities who thought they were above scrutiny. Hugh's voice dripped with disbelief as he repeated her words about questions that mattered. She was dredging up tabloid stories from decades ago and trying to pass it off as some kind of moral crusade. This was not journalism. It was exploitation. It was using her platform to bully guests who could not fight back without looking like the bad guy. Denise said with satisfaction that Hugh was fighting back plenty, and she thought viewers were getting a clear picture of the real Hugh Grant right now. Not the charming romantic lead, but someone who got angry when asked to account for his past behavior. Hugh's composure finally cracked completely. He asked what past behavior she meant. Being young and making mistakes? Dating people and having relationships that did not work out? Was that what needed accounting for? Having a normal human life? The confrontation had escalated far beyond anything the producers had planned. This was supposed to be a light morning chat with a beloved actor promoting his latest film. Instead, it had turned into a public character assassination that was growing more vicious by the moment. Denise pressed her advantage ruthlessly, questioning whether Hugh really called it a normal human life. Some of the women who had been in his life might describe it rather differently. There had been stories about how he treated people when the cameras were not rolling. Hugh's face flushed red with anger and humiliation. The studio lights beat down mercilessly, capturing every moment of his distress. He said it was incredible that she was repeating unsubstantiated gossip as if it were fact, as if anonymous sources in tabloids were gospel truth. Denise asked if he was denying the stories. Was he saying every single report about his behavior had been fabricated? Hugh replied, his voice shaking with fury, that his private life was private. Mistakes he may have made in personal relationships were between him and the people involved, not between him and the television audience or Denise. But Denise was not done. She said she found it fascinating how defensive he was getting. If there was nothing to hide, if all the reports were just tabloid nonsense, then surely a simple denial would suffice. But instead, he was getting angry and deflecting. That told her, and she thought it told viewers, that perhaps there was more truth to these stories than he would like to admit. Hugh stared at her in complete disbelief. The manipulation was so blatant and calculated that for a moment he seemed unable to respond. He finally said it was unbelievable that she was trying to use his natural reaction to being ambushed as evidence of guilt. That was not journalism. That was entrapment. Denise replied smugly that it was called holding people accountable, something that did not happen enough in Hollywood. Too many people got away with too much for too long, then acted shocked when someone finally asked hard questions. The other hosts sat in mortified silence, clearly wanting to end this disaster but unsure how to intervene. The audience remained transfixed, watching what had become less of an interview and more of a public execution. Hugh's voice cracked with incredulous laughter as he repeated her words about hard questions. Hard questions about what? About tabloid gossip? About relationships that ended years ago? About private matters that had nothing to do with the film he was promoting? These were not hard questions. They were invasive personal attacks disguised as journalism. Denise's eyebrows shot up in mock surprise. She said she had not attacked him personally at all. She had simply asked about his past behavior and his accountability for that behavior. If he considered that an attack, then perhaps that said more about his conscience than her questions. That was the exact moment when Hugh's patience finally snapped completely. His face went from flushed to pale in seconds. When he spoke again, his voice was quiet, but filled with controlled rage that was far more frightening than his earlier shouting. He said he had been in the business for over 30 years. He had sat through thousands of interviews with journalists, talk show hosts, and entertainment reporters. Some were good, some were bad, some were indifferent. But never in all those years, had he encountered someone so deliberately cruel and willfully destructive as what he was witnessing right now. Denise opened her mouth to respond, but Hugh held up a hand to stop her. He said she had had her say, and now he would have his. She wanted to talk about accountability? Let them talk about hers. She invited him under false pretenses. She told his publicist this would be a standard promotional interview about his new film. Instead, she used her platform to launch a coordinated attack on his character based on nothing but tabloid speculation and anonymous gossip. The studio was dead silent except for Hugh's voice, which carried clearly through the space. He continued, saying she wanted to talk about responsibility. What about her responsibility as a broadcaster? What about her responsibility to treat guests with basic human dignity? What about her responsibility to viewers to provide actual journalism instead of tabloid trash masquerading as meaningful conversation? Denise tried to interrupt, but Hugh said sharply that he was not finished. His years of Shakespearean training gave his voice a commanding presence that filled the entire studio. He said she sat there in her position of power, hiding behind the pretense of journalism, using her platform to bully and humiliate people who came in good faith. She talked about accountability, but where was hers? When did she account for the damage she did? When did she account for the pain she caused? The cameras continued rolling, capturing every word of what was becoming one of the most dramatic moments in daytime television history. Hugh's famous charm was completely gone, replaced by raw, honest anger that was somehow more compelling than any performance he had ever given on screen. He said this was not journalism. This was exploitation. This was using human pain and private struggles as entertainment. This was king someone's lowest moments, their private failures, their personal relationships, and turning them into content. And she had the audacity to call it accountability. Denise finally found her voice and said Hugh was being completely unreasonable. She was simply doing her job. Hugh laughed bitterly at her words. He said her job was to interview people, not to destroy them. Her job was to inform the audience, not to feed them gossip and speculation. Her job was to be a professional broadcaster, not a tabloid bully with a television platform. He began walking toward the exit, his microphone still attached so his words carried clearly through the studio. He said she wanted a story, so here was her story. This is what happens when journalism dies and gets replaced by voyeurism. This is what happens when entertainment becomes more important than human dignity. This is what happens when people in positions of power forget that their guests are human beings, not content to be consumed. One of the other hosts pleaded desperately for Hugh to please sit down and let them finish this properly. Hugh turned back briefly, his face showing both disgust and profound sadness. He said there was nothing proper about this, and there never was. This was designed to be an ambush from the moment he walked through the door. Well, congratulations to Denise. She got her dramatic television moment. He hoped it was worth it. He reached the edge of the set and paused one final time, looking directly into the camera. He said he wanted anyone watching to understand something. He came there that day to talk about a film he was proud of, a film he hoped would make people laugh and feel good for a couple of hours. Instead, he had been subjected to character assassination based on tabloid gossip and speculation. If this was what passed for journalism on daytime television, then everyone was in serious trouble. With those final words, Hugh Grant walked off the set, leaving behind stunned silence, mortified hosts, and one of the most dramatic moments in the show's history. The cameras continued rolling for several more seconds, capturing Denise's shocked face and the uncomfortable shuffling of her co-hosts before finally cutting to commercial. In just 39 seconds, everything had changed.